Elizabeth Taylor revealed the 7 secretly racist stars in old Hollywood Golden Age history. For nearly 5 decades, Elizabeth Taylor was the most famous woman in the world. Those violet eyes, 2 Academy Awards, 8 marriages, a music life so extraordinary that even the tabloids couldn't keep up with it. Audiences adored her. Studios feared her, and she commanded music the kind of power that most actresses in the Golden Age could only dream about. But what most people never understood about Elizabeth Taylor was that she used that power for something far more dangerous than making movies. She used it to fight. In 1961, music when most of Hollywood was terrified of being seen at a civil rights rally, Taylor was there. When the studios warned their stars' music to stay quiet, she refused. When black performers were denied entry to restaurants and hotels that welcomed her without question, Taylor walked in with them and dared anyone to say a word. Music professor Emily Raymond, who documented Hollywood's role in the civil rights movement, named Taylor among the handful of stars who provided real financial, strategic, and emotional support to the movement at a time when doing so could end a career. In 1956, she starred music in Giant, a film built specifically around the racism that Mexican Americans faced in Texas. She didn't just play a woman who fought prejudice music on screen. She became one. And because of that position, because she was inside the machine, because she worked alongside every major star of the Golden Age and saw what they said and did when the cameras were off, Taylor Music knew things about her colleagues that the public was never meant to hear. She saw one of them perform in blackface as late as 1953 and say nothing was wrong with it. Music she watched another march with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and then turn around years later and declare that white pride was just as valid as black pride. She knew that one of them told a national magazine he believed in white supremacy and never took music it back. And she was there when the most powerful man in entertainment built an empire that taught racism to children before they were old enough to question what they were watching. 7 stars. 7 secrets that Taylor's Hollywood never wanted revealed. And to understand how deep the rot went, we start with a man whose elegance made audiences believe he was incapable of prejudice. The greatest dancer who ever lived. Number 7. Music. Fred Astaire. Elizabeth Taylor grew up at MGM, the same studio system that made Fred Astaire one of the most celebrated performers in history. She watched his films as a child on the lot. She attended the same premieres, moved through the same circles, and understood better than most audiences ever could that the image Hollywood sold was not always the truth. Astaire was elegance itself. Top hat, the bandwagon. A man so graceful that critics said watching him dance was like watching someone defy gravity. For decades, he was held up as the gold standard of sophistication and class. But in 1936, in the film Swing Time, Astaire performed a music number called Bojangles of Harlem in full blackface. Dark makeup covered his skin. He wore an exaggerated costume. The number opened with an enormous caricature of a black face with thick exaggerated lips framing Astaire's entrance like a minstrel show advertisement. He claimed it was a tribute to the legendary black tap dancer Bill Bojangles Robinson. But Robinson's own style was upright, precise, music, and dignified. Astaire's performance was loose-limbed and theatrical, closer to the minstrel tradition that had been used to dehumanize black Americans for over a century. The New York Times later acknowledged the number as one of Astaire's most inventive solo performances, but called it jarring and unnecessarily racist. TCM's reframed classic series addressed it music directly as a deeply problematic moment in an otherwise celebrated career. Black film historian Donald Bogle discussed it as part of the broader music pattern of blackface that Hollywood treated as entertainment. While real black Americans lived under segregation, violence, and Jim Crow, Astaire never publicly addressed the performance, never apologized. Music never acknowledged what it meant to the people it caricatured. Taylor, who would spend her life music fighting exactly this kind of casual dehumanization, grew up in a system that treated it as normal. Astaire's blackface was a single number in a legendary career. But the next star, Taylor knew, took blackface further. He did it multiple times across multiple films, and he did it while America called him the most wholesome man alive. Number 6. Bing Crosby. Taylor moved through a Hollywood where Bing Crosby was considered music untouchable. He was White Christmas. He was an Academy Award winner for playing a Catholic priest in Going My Way. He was the voice that made Americans feel safe during the Depression and the war. Polls named him the most admired man in the country. And Taylor, who understood how carefully Hollywood constructed its public images, also knew what those images concealed. In the 1942 film Holiday Inn, Crosby performed a number called Abraham in full blackface, not subtle shading or theatrical makeup, full minstrel-style music blackface with the entire cast joining him. Actress Marjorie Reynolds appeared beside him in what critics described as Piccanini makeup. The band, the servers, and the background performers were all in blackface. The lyrics celebrated Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves while the entire cast performed in the very minstrel tradition that had been used to mock and dehumanize Black Americans since before the Civil Music War. The original lyrics written by Irving Berlin for that number contained a racial slur so offensive that Black newspapers organized a protest, and Berlin was forced to remove it from printed sheet music. 2 years later in Here Come the Waves, Crosby performed in blackface again. This was 1944. Music Black soldiers were fighting and dying in segregated troops overseas, and Bing Crosby was on an American movie screen in blackface entertaining audiences who saw nothing music wrong with it. AMC eventually began cutting the Abraham number from television broadcasts of Holiday Inn. TCM still shows it, but with music a content warning. A 2014 stage adaptation of the film eliminated the blackface entirely because even a Broadway production team concluded it could not be defended. And according to accounts from within his own family, the attitudes Crosby displayed on screen reflected what he expressed at home. His son revealed that racist jokes were music part of private life in the Crosby household. The wholesome image was exactly that, an image. Taylor, who fought against prejudice publicly when it could have cost her everything, watched men like Crosby hide behind images that protected them from accountability. But the next star on this list did something that shocked even Hollywood insiders. She performed in blackface not in 1936 or 1942. She did music it in 1953, a full decade after it should have been unthinkable, and she was someone Taylor knew personally. Number 5. Joan Crawford. Elizabeth Taylor and Joan Crawford were both MGM royalty. Taylor had essentially replaced Crawford as the studio's biggest music female star. And they knew each other through decades of premieres, industry events, and the music's social world that bound every major star of the Golden Age together. Crawford was Mildred Pierce. She was Grand Hotel. She was the ultimate Hollywood survivor who had reinvented herself across 4 music decades. And in 1953, she stepped onto an MGM soundstage and performed a musical number called Two-Faced Woman in full blackface. This was not the distant past. This was 1 year before Brown Music versus Board of Education. The modern civil rights movement was building. The Korean War had just ended. American society was beginning to confront the reality of racial injustice in ways that music never had before. And Joan Crawford was in Technicolor blackface on camera. Music dark makeup covered her face, her hands, and her legs. She wore a tight curled dark wig. Her eyebrows were bejeweled when she ripped the black wig off in anger during the scene, exposing her red hair against the dark makeup. Critics described the effect as pure visual terror. Reviewers called the performance wildly offensive, grotesque, and unavoidable. Audiences who rediscovered the film decades music later expressed disbelief that it was produced in 1953 and not 1940. James Baldwin, who wrote powerfully about race in Hollywood, described Crawford as a symbol of the whiteness that dominated and controlled Black experience in America, representing landlords and authority figures in the minds of Black moviegoers who watched her from segregated theaters. Crawford had been in Hollywood since the 1920s. Music, she had 30 years of experience when she made that choice. She knew exactly what she was doing. Taylor, who 3 years later would star in Giant, a film that directly confronted racism, watched the same industry that produced Giant also produce a blackface music number and celebrate the woman who performed it. But while Astaire Crosby and Crawford put racism on screen through performance, the next name on this list carried it behind the scenes. And what her biographer revealed about her private music attitudes added a darker dimension to the most famous role in Hollywood history. Number 4. Vivien Leigh. Elizabeth Taylor and Vivien Leigh were both British-born actresses who conquered Hollywood. They music were contemporaries operating at the highest levels of the industry, and Taylor watched Leigh's career with the awareness of someone who understood what the studio system demanded and what it concealed. Leigh won 2 Academy Music Awards. She was Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire, and she was Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, the most commercially successful film of the Golden Age and one of the most racially charged productions Hollywood music ever created. What Taylor understood, and what biographers would later confirm, was that Leigh's private music attitudes toward black people did not contradict the world her most famous role celebrated. Biographers revealed that Leigh made racist remarks about black people behind closed doors, attitudes that aligned disturbingly well with the plantation mythology she portrayed on screen. And her silence during the production of Gone with the Wind spoke loudly. When the film premiered in Atlanta in 1939, Hattie McDaniel, who played Mammy and would go on to become the first black person to win an Academy Award, was barred from attending. The theater enforced segregation. Music Clark Gable was so outraged that he threatened to boycott the premiere entirely. McDaniel herself had to convince him to attend. Leigh said nothing. Music she benefited from a system that excluded black performers from the very celebrations those performers helped create, and she accepted that benefit in silence. She won an Oscar playing a woman who slapped her enslaved servant, and the industry celebrated her for it. The racial attitudes revealed by her biographers were never examined during her lifetime because Hollywood protected the images its music had built. Taylor chose a different path entirely. She used her platform to fight discrimination rather music than profit from it in silence. But the next name on this list represents something far more music disturbing than silence or complicity, because this star did not just fail to fight racism. He actively marched against it, and then he completely reversed course. Number 3. Charlton H. This is the entry that would have cut Elizabeth Taylor the deepest, because Charlton H was supposed to be one of the good ones. In the early 1960s, Music Taylor and H moved in the same activist circles. They were both among the Hollywood stars who publicly supported the civil rights movement at a time when doing so carried real music professional risk. On August 28, 1963, Charlton H marched alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the March on Washington. He had picketed segregated restaurants in Oklahoma in 1961. Music he supported the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He put his name and his fame behind the cause when it mattered. He once said that, like many Americans that summer, he could no longer pay only lip service to a cause that music was so urgently right. Taylor heard those words. She believed them. The entire movement believed them. Music, and then he turned. By the 1990s, the man who had stood beside Doc King was delivering speeches to conservative organizations declaring that white pride is just as valid as black pride. At a speech at Harvard Law School in 1999, he repeated the claim music and attacked what he called militant fists and racial preferences. Those words were praised by white supremacist David Duke, who featured the speech on his own website. Julian Bond, the chairman of the NAACP board, responded publicly. He said Charlton Music H's civil rights credentials are seriously sullied by his bigoted and homophobic remarks and his attacks on racial minorities. Music, the man who marched with King, became a symbol embraced by the people King marched against. As president of the NRA from 1998 to 2003, H used culture war rhetoric music that consistently targeted communities of color while wrapping itself in constitutional language. Taylor never wavered from civil rights in the 1960s to AIDS activism in the 1980s. She never stopped fighting for the people society tried to exclude. H did not just waver. He switched sides, and the betrayal was felt most deeply by the people who had once stood beside him. But the next name on this list did not bother with a transformation. He did not pretend to support equality and then abandon it. He simply said what he believed out loud on the record, and he never apologized. Number 2. John Wayne. Elizabeth Taylor and John Wayne were the two biggest stars of their generation. They attended the same ceremonies, received the same industry honors, and occupied the very top of Hollywood's power structure. But behind the cowboy music hat and the American flag was a man whose beliefs would have horrified Taylor. In 1971, Playboy magazine published an interview with John Wayne that stripped away every myth the screen had built around him. His exact words were, "I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." He He said he did not feel guilty about the fact that generations ago these people were slaves. Music. When asked about Native Americans, he said he did not feel we did wrong in taking this great country away from them, because the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves. He dismissed Hollywood's music efforts to include black actors as nothing more than tokenism and boasted that when he directed films, music he gave black performers what he called their proper position, casting a black man as a slave. Wayne never retracted a single word, never apologized, never music expressed regret. When the interview resurfaced decades later and went viral, music it triggered campaigns to rename the airport that bears his name in Orange County. USC removed a Wayne exhibit music from its film school. The quotes were verified as completely authentic by multiple fact-checking organizations. His son Ethan attempted to defend him by saying it was a different time, but it was 1971. The civil rights movement had already happened. Laws had already changed. Taylor had already marched. The world had moved. Music. Wayne simply refused to move with it. Taylor fought for a world where every person was treated with dignity regardless of race. Wayne declared in a national magazine that he believed music one race was superior to another, and saw nothing wrong with saying so. But the final name on this list, music, represents something more dangerous than even John Wayne's open declaration, because this man did not just hold racist beliefs. He built an empire that taught those beliefs to children before they were old enough to question what they music were learning. Number 1. Walt Disney. Elizabeth Taylor grew up in Walt Disney's Music Hollywood. She was a child star at MGM while Disney was building his empire on the studio lot next door. She understood better than almost anyone how the entertainment industry shaped what America believed, because she had been music shaped by it herself. Disney was Mickey Mouse. He was Disneyland. He was the happiest place on earth and the man who made childhood magical for generations of American families. And behind that magic was a man whose private language and institutional decisions revealed something the public was never meant to know. During the casting process for Song of the South in 1946, Music Disney told a colleague that he had found abroad, and these were his words, "Well, little Pekin to play a black child in the film." During a story meeting for Snow White, he used a racial slur so severe that modern biographers included only to document the reality of who Disney was in private. The NAACP protested Song of the South upon its release for its depiction of black characters as happily serving on a plantation in the post-Civil War South. Clarence Muse, the black consultant Disney had hired to advise on the film's portrayal of music black life, was so disgusted by the studio's refusal to incorporate his suggestions for positive representations that he
resigned before the script was even finished. Music Disney withdrew the film permanently from American distribution because even the company eventually concluded it could not be defended. The legacy was so toxic that in 2023, Disney shut down Splash Mountain, one of its most popular theme park attractions, because the ride was based entirely on Song of the South. They replaced it with a Princess and Music the Frog theme. Decades after the film was locked away, the company was still dismantling what music it had built, but Song of the South was not an isolated failure. It was part of a pattern that stretched across decades. Dumbo featured jive talking crows led by a character literally named Jim Crow. Peter Pan included a musical number called What Makes the Red Man Red that reduced Native Americans to a collection of crude stereotypes. The Siamese cats in Lady and the were drawn and voiced using exaggerated Asian caricatures that taught children to laugh at an entire culture. For more than 40 years, Disney films presented racial caricatures as wholesome family entertainment. Music. These were not accidents. They were creative decisions made by a studio that Walt Disney personally controlled. And the hiring practices reflected the same exclusion. Disney's music first black animator, Floyd Norman, was not hired until the 1950s. For nearly 2 decades, the studio that defined American childhood had no black creative voices involved in shaping the stories it told to millions of children. Every other star on this list was racist in ways that affected individuals. Single performances, single interviews, single betrayals. Walt Disney built racism into a system. A system that reached music into the homes of millions of families and shaped how children understood race before they were old enough to think critically about what they were watching. Elizabeth Taylor Music spent her final decades fighting discrimination wherever she found it. Against its patience when the world wanted to look away, against the LGBTQ community when society music tried to exclude them. Against anyone that the powerful decided did not deserve dignity. Walt Disney spent his decades building the most beloved brand in entertainment history while embedding racial caricatures into the very foundation of American music childhood. Taylor used her power to open doors. Disney used his to decide who got to be human in the stories that children grew up believing were true. 7 stars, 7 secrets that Elizabeth Taylor's Hollywood never wanted revealed. She saw the blackface, the slurs, the silence, and the betrayals. She worked alongside these people. She knew what they said when the cameras stopped rolling. And while they performed racism on screen and practiced it music behind closed doors, Taylor chose to fight. Which name on this list shocked you the most? Drop it in the comments below. And if you want more hidden stories from the Golden Age, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next.